So we are going to get started. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Stefanie Sebok-Syer. I'm at Stanford in the Department of Emergency Medicine, and this is by far the best sessions. So last year we did a thing, and we had the great debate, the great CBME debate, and as you can see, our winner there in the center, Dr. Font. So we have prepared a series of questions, and this session requires audience participation. So we're going to go through, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves, and then what we're going to do is we're going to just ask them questions. And I need you guys to tell me, like, who do you want to hear from, right? Who do you want the response from? Who's going to be pro? Who's going to be con? You guys take sides. I'm going to ask for you to tell me, who do you think said it the best and whatnot. So we're going to do some quick introductions here. I want to introduce my co-host here.
Hi, I'm Chad. I'm one of the first-year Education Scholarship Fellows at OHSU.
Yeah. And so at any point throughout this today, like I said, feel free, jump in. We're going to start here with Dr. Schnapp and then just pass it down, okay?
How's it going, guys? I'm Ben Schnapp. I'm the Associate PD at the University of Wisconsin, as well as the Education Scholarship Fellowship Director up there.
Hi, Holly Crowdwire, Associate PD for Stanford EM Residency and the Competency-Based Education Implementation Lead at the School of Medicine.
Hi, I'm Abra Fant. I'm the Program Director at Northwestern in Chicago.
Matt, can we do it without the mic? I'm the Program Director.
Would you have a deep voice like that? You could do it without the mic. I'm Mike Gisani. I'm the Vice Chair of Education at Stanford.
I'm going to lower the voice frequency so I can do it without the mic, but I'm Kevin Scott, one of the APDs at Penn and from the Education Scholarship Fellowship. In the spirit of competition.
I'm a recovering program director, and now I work as a clinician in Geisinger system.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get started here. How do you think we should get started? I feel like, I don't know, where does CBME start for us? What do we want to start with? Can you throw out a couple topics? Let's let the audience choose.
We got reductionism of outcomes, we have faculty development, and legal considerations.
All right, so what do you think, thank you. What do you think would be interesting there? Come on. Faculty development. All right. Who of this lovely panel do we think is faculty development, Chad?
We got Dr. Gisandi for pros, and we got Dr. Branzetti for cons.
Okay. So how this is going to work is they're going to get 30 seconds to a minute, to give their pitch, and then we're going to cut them off, and then we're going to vote on, are we pro or are we con for faculty development? So who should start us off? What do you think?
Let's start with Dr. Gisandi.
All right, Dr. Gisandi.
Sounds good. So thanks for coming, everyone. I'm going to appeal to your knowledge of CBME. I assume you're all interested in CBME because that's why you're here. But do you really feel like you can do expert assessments in CBME? Like, look at your hard hearts right now and try to answer that question. And you're the interested faculty members, right? So if we're going to have excellent diagnostic assessors, it requires training. All good things in medical education require rigorous training, and this does as well. If we want to have the best assessment program that we can have, we have to have a cadre of assessors who know what they're doing. And, I think the well-meaning faculty, like myself and yourself, I think they can contribute in great ways in teaching, but, assessment is a different story. It has implications for graduation, competency, legal issues, and money. And we really should be trusting that with the really best trained folks that we can have.
Okay, and for the con position.
Everything said is wrong. No. So I would agree with the idea that if we're talking about high-stakes assessment, you want the best trained people to do that. But if you really look at the majority of what we're going to talk about for most of CBME, it's the mosaic model. It's lots of small assessments, mostly low stakes, and in generally a formative program that we're coming up with, right? It's the growth-oriented time along the way. So I think it becomes a problem if you try and just two things, what I think of as a program director, for the PDs out here. Is it the small handful of faculty who always identify the residents or that are in need of help? Or is it the oh, by the way conversation from someone who is the sentinel monitor, the rank and file person who said, I saw this and talk about it? And that's what really develops it. If we cut those people out of the loop, we're cutting out a really broad and diverse source of inputs to the growth and the assessments of our residents. The second thing I worry about is the issue of if you really just put a couple of people as being the assessors, so they're the ones that are the judges, and the residents will no longer see everybody as here to help me grow. They're going to look at those people on shift and say they're here to watch me and judge me, whereas everybody else is the faculty, or they're the safe ones. So then you start getting Hawthorne effect problems. You start getting all this change in culture, where I think if you really just have a few people with this title, instead of everyone with this sort of orientation or mindset, then I think you unintentionally make culture changes you're not.
Okay, so now is your time to vote. Are you pro faculty development? If you are, raise your hand. I don't know. Do you have a rebuttal for that?
Well, if you listen carefully, his very first sentence, he said he agreed with everything I said. He did, yeah.
So do you have a small group of people, or do you have to use the whole faculty group? I think that's the key question. All right. There's development. You only have so much.
All right, do you want us to vote for both of you? Is that what you're saying here? Yes. Do you take the, okay, let's rephrase. Do you take the Mike Gismondi position, or do you take the Jeremy Branzetti position? All right. So everyone in favor of the Mike Gismondi position, raise your hand. The all opposed? So what do you think, Chad? Who do you think won that one?
I think it was Mike Gismondi.
Mike Gismondi. All right, score a point for Mike Gismondi.
When you say all the data, so what inputs do you use at your institution? You have multiple inputs into your CCC besides, and to get the rank and file, the non-core humans plus whatever expert assessor, whatever that looks like.
I mean, it's basically getting everyone involved, because the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And honestly, I just want all the narrative data, because that's what's going to matter more. And if you just have a couple of people sending you the narratives, calm down. Then you're not going to have a full picture of confidence. You're not going to be able to make it just like a substantive informed decision without having all of that data. You're just getting it from a couple select people. Yeah, you're going to have like high precision because all of those people are probably going to agree with each other. That's fine. Then that you have, but like, why are you getting 85 other assessors and content specificity and all these other things when you're making decisions?
And this is why, the diverse CCCs are so important, because we sit on the exact same CCC, and I'm like, okay, yep, I agree with that position. However, I also just want data, where I can just remove the rater altogether, right? So, all right, what is our next topic, Chad?
I think next we'll do reductionism of outcomes. And the key question / statement here will be, the complexity of clinical work can't be fundamentally reduced to categorical entrustment categories. And we have a pro position and a con position. Looks like we have pro is Jeremy Branzetti again.
All right, we're giving you a
And
chance.
con, we have Holly Coretta-Wire.
All right, here you go.
So the question here is, if you are trying to be able to come up with the assessment for can you boil down what you're observing, all the things that need to be observed in a CBME system? So can we do all those things, right? Can I observe a central line properly? Heck yes, right? That's easy to do. Can you observe empathy properly? Can you observe any number of these other skills that you're trying to EQ, the ability to actually be curious and learn more? There's so many of these things that are missing, or that we don't have the means to do it. Now, if we had the better assessments, that'd be great. And in a CBME world, it is possible to build them, I'll say that. But as we jump forward with implementation, and these have not been built yet, whenever you have a system like this, you're going to wind up having people, both from a faculty group who only know how to do the easier assessments, right? I can watch them do this thing. And you're going to have learners who are going to avoid the harder assessments. And so you're just going to get people doing the things you can see, and you're going to miss the important stuff. So I think it's just my argument on this is that it's not mature enough to have captured this, because we're moving forward before the tools are built for it.
I have thoughts. So what I heard was that you said it's possible. But I mean, that's the crux of implementation science, is it not? So I think you can boil down a lot of what we do into the things that you watch people do every single day. I watch residents resuscitate patients. I watch them do procedures. I can quantify the amount of supervision I'm providing them. I'm basically just putting a number and a narrative to things that we've been doing since the dawn of Flexner over a century ago. I don't necessarily think that every single thing that we do belongs in an EPA, but that's the whole premise of programmatic assessment. You take these individual activities and you say, here's how much supervision I provided, and here's my narrative about that assessment, but then you bring in other perspectives and multi-source feedback and all of these things. And then when you feel like they're not making progress, you take that big step back and you say, why is that progress not happening? Is it something that I'm quantifying? Yes, no. Do you take that bottom-up approach and say it's one of the components? Or is this, a top-down issue where I'm looking at this and they're simply not making progress, and maybe it's because of one of these things you talk about, EQ, trustworthiness. I don't necessarily know that we have a good way of saying trustworthiness. No, mine. But I think it's... I feel like this argument is just going on and on and on. Branzetti, would you like to rebuttal?
Well, I mean, look, we're taking this as debate format as if there is this binary yes or no, and there's obviously not. This is a lot harder than that. But I would say, one, let's talk about our attempts to quantify things. How are those milestone numbers coming out for you? The faculty really getting that point, or are they all threes and change, right? So even when we try to break down the simple ones, we still stink at the numbers. The narrative is a fair point if we have the skill set to both collect it and then analyze it. But I think that this is a lot of the problem when people just write this, right? What's the narratives we get? Study more, try like read a little bit more, like good effort. Like we often wind up getting crummy narratives as well. And if we don't have the means that refine the tool to collect better stuff, then it's just garbage in, garbage out.
Well, that might be a failure of the faculty development process, as noted in your lab. All right, so this is that point in time. How many people buy into that Branzetti argument? Put up your hand. Come on, you guys. If you don't vote, we don't have winners.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, sorry. If you would like to vote for this doctor. Okay. Or this one here. Raise your hand. Okay, I have a feeling way too many people walked in and are like, what did I just walk into here, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's what it's, yeah.
I don't actually know that we even determined a winner on that one.
Yeah, might have to call it a tie.
You want your points? All right, well, you will have a chance. You will have a chance.
Yeah.
All right, so for everyone that has walked in, we have a series of CBME questions. We have these esteemed faculty here who are all going to give you either a pro or a con perspective on that, and this only works if you participate. So, go, this is the argument. Yeah, that resonates with me. And so when I say raise your hand, I need you to raise your hand, okay? You also might be wondering why this lovely lady in the middle is wearing this CBME champion crown. Well... For the cheap seats at the back, it says CBME champion here. So, Chad, can you give me a question that Dr. Font can answer?
Yeah, I think we should pick on our reigning champion.
Yeah.
Let's do legal considerations.
Okay, legal considerations.
Yeah.
And do you want to take the pro or the con position? Con position. All right. And Chad, who should battle?
I think we should do Matt Perot on the con.
Okay. All right. Here.
Let me give the prompt for the audience. So our prompt for this is our residents will sue us if we don't graduate them as soon as they meet their competency thresholds.
I'm gunning for the crown. So I think we've all agreed that CBME is really important. I think it's clearly the standard. I think we all agree with that. The problem is that when we push really far into that world, we are essentially buying into the idea that we would declare some residents to not be meeting competencies. And I think if we were doing this all at the level that we might want to be doing it, we might actually find that people are not
Did you not see those beautiful curves in the keynote this morning? All right, here we go.
Yeah, I can probably just use my teacher voice here. So I understand that it's nerve-wracking. I think we're all afraid of the reaction, right? Ultimately, we want our residents to like us. We want our future colleagues to like us. And it's scary to say you're not ready. But ultimately, we are beholden to the public that we are training physicians to take care of. And if we have tools, and this is presuming the tools are good, which they may not be at this point, but if we make that assumption and we have tools that are functional and good, we owe it to our current patients, our future patients, to say you are not ready yet. And I think you just have to be upfront with people about that. We say the paradigm is changing. This is no longer you're signing a 3 or 4 year contract. This is based on your performance evaluations. And there's some tiny amount of case precedent, which I hate to get into because apparently case precedent doesn't mean anything anymore in this country. But
So you can probably just hold the vote right now. I'll concede.
no one has ever successfully sued for education malpractice, saying that because I did something wrong after I've been out in practice that I'm going to come back and sue the people who didn't train me well. So there is some idea behind this that legally we are protected. We're entering into this contract with them, that we are educating them and training them. I think you just have to set different precedent when they come in.
I think it'll be interesting. If we got to that point, though, I think it would be interesting to see what happened with, because we would take those competency-based measures that we've all thought about and developed, and you've said that they have to be good, and I agree with you, and those competency-based measures might actually be subjected to a legal discovery process, and someone else might be looking at them with a very different eye. And they would look at them with the eye of not only are these good, are these valid, but they also might be looking at them with an eye, are they applied equitably across your entire program? Does anybody want to live in that world of discovery where someone says, okay, you've declared, I'm trying to top that applause line about the Supreme Court here, probably not doing very well. So you've declared Holly to not meet her competency, but now during the discovery process, now during the discovery process, I want to know how that looked for all these other residents who have graduated. And if there was a hint of bias there, either alleged or real, you'd be in a world of hurt.
Then it becomes a different kind of case, right? But I do think that there is some idea that as educators, we are responsible for making these determinations, and I think the courts understand that, I hope. So yes, is it scary? Yes, I think it is. But is it something we could live with? I do think so.
I think Amber just said that she had faith in the courts and that didn't have faith in the courts, so I want to just throw that out.
I have faith in the lower courts.
Okay.
You only get one rebuttal here. All right, so let's try this again. For the MAP position, raise your hand. For the ABRA position, raise your hand. All right.
There we go.
This is how it's done, everyone. All right. We have not heard from a couple of our panelists yet, Chad.
No, we haven't.
Yeah,
That's my fault.
Can you make that happen? What do we need to be talking about to hear from Ben at the end there?
Yeah, let's go towards implementation here. And the prompt is CBME puts too much burden of assessment on the learners.
On the learners, okay.
Do you want pros or con?
I'm going to take pro.
Pro? Okay. So then we can have Dr. Scott towards the end there on cons.
All right.
All right, so this is a really important part of this, right? Like, how is this going to happen when the rubber meets the road? And if this is something that, if CBME is just put on the learner and it's their responsibility to go to their attendings to get these assessments, what are we going to do? This whole system relies, it's a house of cards based on the idea that people are getting these assessments, that we're going to have a lot of data to work with, and that we have enough to make reliable and valid judgments. Well, what do you do for that resident who's not turning in their cards? They're not giving you any data or not nearly enough data to work with. If you put all of this on the learner, now you're having very uncomfortable conversations where you're making these sometimes very high stakes, potentially legally legal ramifications type decisions with in a world of no data. So this is something that this can't be all on the learner. The learners have a ton of stuff to worry about already. They're having to deal with the fact that they don't know how to practice emergency medicine independently yet. Their schedules are much busier than ours as attendings. This has to be a shared, not burden, but responsibility. This is something that has to be, there has to be administrative support, there has to be departmental support, there has to be faculty support. This cannot be something that is purely a learner activity only.
I disagree. So the ability to self-assess should be a competency in and of itself. What happens after you leave residency, that you find yourself in a rural emergency department and you come up against a novel situation, perhaps someone visiting Yellowstone while they have their VAD, and you've never seen a VAD patient before, and now they're bleeding. You have these novel knowledge gaps now that you need to have had the ability in this practice in using assessment to acknowledge your own personal knowledge gaps, to recognize, wow, this is something new that I've never experienced before. But because I went to a residency that really prepared me in doing accurate self-assessment, I have a toolkit that I can now bridge this gap and save this patient's life. I mean, that's the purest reason why assessments should be put on the learner. And it can be guided. It's a competency, right? So perhaps it's measured that we see that progression through residency. There's coaching. There's the ability to help that person through the activity of self-assessment. It's not put on them to be good self-assessors from the get-go, but we have the ability to make sure that when they leave residency, that they're going to be good lifelong learners and be able to actually continue their development.
So I think you agree with my position wholeheartedly, because you're endorsing guided self-assessment, which is exactly what I'm proposing here with getting more people besides the learner just involved. I certainly agree with the idea of we've got to create these master adaptive learners, these people who can go out there and not just be really competent at the sorts of things that they know, but be able to grow and change and adapt to new challenges that come along. But we know that people are terrible at self-assessment. We know that they can't do it by themselves. They can't, they're not going to make good independent judgments. They need data. They need coaching. They need external stimuli to anchor their self-assessments in. And that's what the broader system of assessment is all about, in my opinion.
So when does the assessment then become their responsibility? Because I'm not going with my residents to where they're going to work one day. I'm not going to be there to help them interpret the data, but to get the assessment of their clinical abilities, of their efficiency.
But that never goes away in the community, right? You're always getting your patient's bounce back data, your press gamies. Like, there's always going to be feedback. They'll come find you. And you do a good job.
As you see, we.
That's the first thing I teach the residents.
So you guys want to curl up in a ball when you first go to your first attending shift, or you want to be set to excel? Because you know what to do.
I feel like the gloves are off here. Like, this is not even a friendly debate anymore. Yeah, it's like, all right, ding, Voting for Kevin here. Who thinks Kevin had the... Oh, okay. There you go. Nice. Who's voting for Ben here?
Ooh, I think it was Ben.
You're going to take
Yeah.
it? Okay, Ben's going to take it. All right. Well, I want to see what else you can do, Ben. Can we throw another question at you?
Yeah.
I saw you didn't want to stop, so let's go with the momentum, but let's move topics here. Chad, let's give him another question.
So this one will be about financial implications. So the prompt is, despite upfront cost, CBME implementation will eventually save money. It looks like we'll have Ben here on the cons, and then we'll have our reigning champion, Abra, on the pros.
All right, you're up.
All right. So the question is that CBME will, over the course of time, save money?
Yes.
Absolutely, it will save money. So I'm gonna come back to my argument from the last one, not about the Supreme Court, but we are beholden to our patients. So if we are beholden to the patients and we are training people to be excellent clinicians who are providing efficient quality care, that is going to cost the overall system much less in the long run. Now, are there some upfront costs? Absolutely. It's implied in the question. There is a lot of the faculty development. There's a lot of the tool development. There's the overhaul of the entire system if we're thinking about moving from time-based to competency-based. But if we trust that CBME is going to give us better physicians who have better outcomes, we will, over the long haul, save a ton of money nationally, which is absolutely what we have to do in the United States.
So, I mean, I think the question is like, whose money are you saving here, right? Like, this is certainly nationally, there's a big picture to be had here, and I think we're not going to argue that we don't want better patient outcomes, but you just said, oh, all we have to do is overhaul the system. I mean, think about what the amount of money that's going to take. I think you're inadvertently supporting my point here. All we have to do is change everything about the way medical education has been essentially since the dawn of time. It'll probably be pretty cheap. I think we can do it on a budget. Like I just.
That's not the question. The question is, upfront costs aside, will it save money in the long run?
But again, save money to who? Save whose money? The hospital that's going to have to be doing and paying for all of this faculty development that, other opinions aside, is probably going to have to happen to make this happen. You're going to need data analysts to be able to, look at these large volumes of data and visualize it in ways that make sense to people and that we can use to make good entrustment decisions about. You're going to need you're going to need administrators to, create these apps that people are going to use. They're going to collect the feedback cards and collate them. There's so much that goes into this and none of these are one-off expenses either. This is going to be ongoing things. You're never going to not need data analysts. You're never going to not need administrators and ongoing faculty development to get new people up to speed and to help people constantly improve and get better. These are expensive. I'm not saying that this isn't worth it. It's definitely worth it, but it's going to cost a lot.
So you named a bunch of things that we already pay for. We're just going to reallocate the work they're doing to be more meaningful and effective. Also, who better to do work for free than medical educators? This is like the best source of labor for the government ever. And we're talking about government money. Like, ultimately, the government is paying the hospitals to pay the salaries of these residents. And we're saying that the government is paying for the overall amount of insurance and healthcare that's in the country. It's different pots right now, but it's coming from the same place. And I think overall, it will end up being in the black.
Just briefly. This is the one thing, though, that we can't just put onto medical educators. Like, you need other people. There's a whole system that's in place here that is going to be expensive. If you could just squeeze a little more out of the doctors, yeah, you're right. You could probably save some money there. But these are people that cost a lot of money, people that, can analyze the data, that people can visualize. You can't just wave your hands and say computers.
How old are you? All right, we need you to vote now. The Ben position. I will give you that the data analysts are definitely cheaper than you guys. The other position?
Oh, yeah, looks
All
like
right.
Abra.
Yeah. So how are we doing? So how are we doing for scores here, Chad?
Yeah, so to break it down, we have Abra with 2 points in first. We have both Dr. Jazandi and Ben with 1 point each. And then we have Holly and Jeremy with half a point each.
Half a point?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I would like to open this up. This is what we did last time. We have some pre-selected questions, and we have more pre-selected questions. But does anybody in the audience have a question? All right.
So you spoke kind of earlier in that legal question about, hey, we're not going to, someone could sue if you hold them beyond your 3 or 4 years. What about the resident that via CBME has met all of those metrics in 2.5 years and now wants to hang up per shingle in there. Is that something that you see as a future, as a possibility for CBME-based assessment that then actually divorces itself from an actual longitudinal training paradigm?
Is there anyone who would like to jump on that in a response? I think he just wants an answer to the question. He's like, okay. I mean, that's fair. I would like for this to be a scored answer, to be clear. Okay, so someone is welcome to fight with me after this. But I think, so I'm going to divorce two parts of your question. So the implication is that competency-based education is inherently time variable, and I want to debunk that myth a little bit. You can have competency-based education, the 5 core components being a framework, developmental progression, coaching, individualized learning, and programmatic assessment. Time variable is actually not a core component of CBME. And I think that that's inherent to the system in which we live, right? It's really hard in a service versus education system, in a system where GME and UME funding don't support CBME currently, like in a system that needs to be grossly overhauled to support time variable education, to immediately say that, yes, we're going to go competency-based time variable. However, I do see that as a possibility in the future, and that is going to take, again, gross structural change. And the reason being is, obviously, we have service obligations to fulfill. And you are going to have trainees that want to graduate early. My position on this, I tend to be actually a little bit less of a proponent of time variable, because I think implementation science, you can, Teresa, thank you for this analogy. You think about, can you prove CBME works, right? And people always ask that. You can't do randomized control trials on gross systemic change, right? Nobody proved Flexner worked, but we've been doing it for more than a century. It's like doing randomized control trials on a rocket. Eventually, you have to launch the rocket. You can't do randomized control trials on it. It's implementation science. You have to launch it. There will be dead rockets in the backyard because you're going to iterate until one works. And I think we need to do that in a time-fixed situation still, because we need to figure out the implementation science behind CBME before we move into a time variable scenario. What does that mean for people who are ready early? It means that we need to find ways to challenge them or provide them alternative opportunities.
We just want to rebut her comment.
Well, I don't even know what side we're on. But the one thing I would say is that despite everything that you said, which makes a lot of sense, I don't think that you answered Colin's question, because my question, and where I agree with Colin, is if you think about the smartest person that you worked with in residency, I'm thinking of a critical care attending at Northwestern right now, who probably could, if you created a set of, so he's board certified in pulmonary medicine, critical care, and internal medicine. If you created a set of CBME endpoints to training for cardiology or potentially nephrology, I think that an argument would be made he could probably meet all of those competencies. So why is he not also a nephrologist?
Because our initial certification system blows. That is the end point here, is that everything we do with initial certification is so ingrained in, you have to take a test, it has to happen in this specific week, it's only offered once a year, and it's all medical knowledge based, or it's these things that we have to spend wild amounts of money to put on oral boards. It's
You say that you have to meet these 30
yeah.
competencies to be a nephrologist.
If he checks the boxes, why can't he be a nephrologist?
It's because initial certification is set up the way it is.
But if you believe that, Holly, then why aren't you graduating this resident who is 2.5 years into training?
So,
Neither one of us have a point.
Guys, we're supposed to be making CBME look fun. This is what happens behind closed doors. We are awarding a point to Holly, and we are awarding a point to Matt for taking the random question, regardless of what position they took.
I will say, from a practical standpoint, to answer Colin's question, this is still employment. So I think that there is an argument to be made to say that, yes, you are competent enough, but we have also employed you for a certain amount of time, and you must fulfill that contract. So I do think that there is some space for that.
Why though? Let's say somebody comes in and they were an experienced physician assistant. Why can't they do a year's worth of EM training, and if they check all
I come from a world where we might do a thoracotomy once in our training, if you're lucky, or half of one maybe. And so we have the slow learner 5-year program, for which you pass that ridiculous exam, hopefully in 4th year, although you get a second try now in 5th year. And time variability is something we're trying to think about, but it'll probably be a blended model that's more promotion in place, so that, for instance, there might be extra staffing shifts that we can't fill right now because we're super short, and could a 5th year resident who's passed their exam be certified in place to work a staff shift, for instance, and get sign off from someone that's remote supervising them, et cetera, to ease them into what we call the transition to practice phase, because that's what we call the last phase in Canadian CBME. And so I do think that you're both right. There's systems change that has to happen, but it'll be about how we can be innovative and smart about how we can find ways to do that. And yes, 5 years is a long time.
The fellowship is built in, it's not that bad. One of the ways that I've actually been thinking about this is thinking about like equity, and also thinking about like when residents go off and they have like parental leave, and one of the challenges is when a resident is off, someone still has to fill those shifts. And so, maybe that could be an opportunity in the future for us to try some of this out and give some credit.
So, the one gentleman, I think, maybe made the point more succinctly that I was going to make, but in my experience, those high-achieving learners that, quote, might be able to be done early may only be strong in an area or two and are not globally strong in everything to make them fully competent in all of the competencies. And programs often also have the opportunity to stretch them a little bit. So when the point was made about there is a contractual nature to the relationship, there's also an experiential nature of the relationship, like that magic N of 10,000. Yes, there's going to be the test-taking superstar that may test out of some things, but I suspect they won't test out of everything.
All right, Chad, can you give us the bonus round questions? I feel like you still have 2 there, and who would you like for those?
Yeah, I feel like we haven't heard from Mike Gisande in a while, so we're going to give a question about analytics. And the prompt is, residents should be responsible for using and interpreting their own data. Do you want pros or cons, Dr. Gisande?
Sorry, say the prompt again. They have to be responsible for?
Residents should be responsible for using and interpreting their own data.
I'll go pro. I'll
Okay.
go pro on that.
Who wants to try to gain a point and go for cons?
I'll always argue that.
I'll take on Ben. Let's do Kevin.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
Pity point. Let's go.
All right, so should residents be responsible for their own data? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think they should, right? So they're adult learners. Adult learners need to be internally or intrinsically motivated to be successful. And they need to be able to seek education to fill their own gaps that they self-assess for. Now, I admittedly will concede that we are great self-assessors, so we can create our own data, or we can, solicit our own data and create our own data visualization, and then go to a coach and get some input and insight into what that data means. I think a really great example of this is the promotion and tenure committee decisions, right? So you don't go to a P&T committee and have them assess you and create data for you and interpret data for you in order to go up the professoriate. You put your best dossier forward, and you come up with all of the best parts of your CV and what you're doing in your activities, and you make an argument in your long form, a written narrative about what it is that you've been doing that makes you qualified to go up the professoriate. Then they compare that to some hidden metric that they have, and they make a decision dichotomously whether yes or no you're correct. So we can have learners be responsible for their data. We can teach them how to visualize their data in meaningful ways. We can coach them so that they understand the meaning. And then if they don't meet the mark, we can tell them you don't meet the mark, and here's the reason why. They iterate their adjustments and they iterate their self-assessments, but they remain responsible and they remain intrinsically motivated. And I think that's very important.
I'm against learners doing self-assessment apparently now. So let me come up with an argument. So we're bad at self-assessments. We're not going to ever be good at self-assessments. On top of that, there's a lot of nuances to the data that we get. So number one, the tools. Are they even good tools? Like, what data are we providing to our residents, our learners, and then what do they do with it? And if we aren't even sure about the tools that we're using in terms of what they actually measure, then it's frankly irresponsible then to give these learners this data and say, do something with it. So it's, oh gosh. But now I've lost my train of thought, so I need some of Ben's energy.
Didn't Dr. Gisandi say pro and then say he was going to take that data to someone else to interpret?
I heard. Well, tag it.
It sounds like that was a little on
I'd like to involve the crowd on my side. My favor.
I'll even add on the one important point, which I think is the underpinning trouble with this, is that residents are not adult learners. They are chronological adults. Very few of them have reached the developmental milestones to be adult learners, as our paper just shows, which plug will be spoken about in about 30 minutes in the other room. So, but the point being, like, this is something that is we want them to be, but our system does not create this current.
And this is really complicated, right? Like, I think of the, Sally Sampson, web that you put up with all the different types of data that we get on learners, all the different types of assessment. Nursing, direct observation, 360s. How are we expecting learners who are not necessarily familiar with all of the subtleties of these different types of assessments, how are we expecting them to synthesize this all together into a coherent, path forward for themselves? That's our job. That's what we do every day. That's what we're good at. We should go ahead and do our job.
But are we? I don't know. I think.
I hope there were about 3 people in the audience right now. All right, so first of all, I don't know that anyone on this panel truly knows the primary literature about self-assessment being bad. And don't we think that we can teach someone how to self-assess? We teach them how to resuscitate a dying patient. I'm sure that we can teach them how to interpret a little bit of data. And it's not that they are creating every data point. As you just said, there's this web of data that's out there. They can probably look at a web of data that says you're average and then come up with the summative assessment of, I'm pretty average. I think they're capable of doing that. Do you need to bring it to Strelo? God, I've got to everybody. So Strelo, Dr. Strelo, contends that it's not, they can't self-assess if someone else has to coach them. Well, that's the whole point of teaching them self-assessment, right? So you can be right, you can be wrong, and that's why we have coaches. We can coach them into understanding that they are doing a good job or they're not, and then they iterate their next self-assessment. It's not like it's a one-and-done dichotomous thing. They come back with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more nuance, some more data to help them, a bunch more averages, and they go, I think I'm average. And you say, yes, you're average, correct. And that's okay.
How many people have gone through their residency and have not discovered, different types of assessments that are being used to, help you get through your residency? The other issue here is that because our tools are so bad, they're not bad, but they're not great, we're frequently changing them. We work in a dynamic system of healthcare with things like pandemics and other things, which then take away opportunities that may have served as the basis for these different assessment tools. And so the problem is, as we're iterating, as learners are iterating their ability to self-assess and we're guiding them, we're starting from step 1 with each new tool that's implemented because we've had to overhaul just our programs.
All right, so I need your votes now, and this is going to be a very, very crucial vote. So we are voting, here, I should say, no, you're voting for either Dr. Gisandi or the interdependent team. How many agree with the position of Dr. Gisandi? Raise your hand. The position of Dr. Scott et al. Okay. All right. So we have the last and final round. Does anybody want to be the question for we have 2 people that are tied, right?
Yes, we have Abra and Mike Gisandi that are tied right now.
Okay, so this is the final round. So we can come up with a question for them, or you can come up with a question for them. Is anybody feeling? Of course.
I have a proposal for a question. I want to know if you're going to
young do you have to start that process? Like what grade? I want somebody to commit to a grade or a time period in your learning where you have to start learning that, because I am not convinced at all that you can start residency. That is a proposed question, but not.
Yeah, okay. So, as our reigning champ, you get to take either the pro or con position.
I mean, I don't know what I can be pro or con to.
Well,
Come up with a number.
okay, yeah, there we go. Well, no, I think this is a great question, and I think there's actually more that you can add to that than just the number. So we'll give you both each a minute to state your position, and then indulge Dr. Strela with a number.
All right. So I completely agree with you. I don't think it can start in residency. I think to Jeremy's point, like we have not given people the tools to truly be adult learners by the time they get to residency. So that means we have to start earlier. And if you think about the way at least the U.S. Education system is set up, we're probably looking at grade school to be able to really start thinking about assessment in a meaningful way. I don't know that kindergarten is probably appropriate for this, right? But, somewhere around third or fourth grade, I think people are able to make the distinctions cognitively about, separating it from themselves. This is not a personal judgment on me. This is a statement about my work. And then you start coaching them from there. And that would probably make our jobs fundamentally much, much easier by the time we get people who are now ready to be adult learners. And honestly, we could focus on the content again, which would be fantastic. So for any grade school teachers out there who want to take this on, I'm with you.
Okay, so I have lots to say on this. So I think the fundamental difference between pre-medical school and medical school is the transition from structured learning to unstructured learning. So structured learning and classroom-based learning, everything is an external measure of what you do, right? You take tests and you pass the test or you don't pass the test. So it's not conducive to a world of self-assessment, right? It's very structured. You're externally motivated and externally driven. You know, did I get an A? Did I get a B? And you sort of know what that means. I think in an unstructured environment, you have the ability to capture data in all these different ways, including from the perspective of the learner, in ways that probably were inauthentic. Like when you, Matt, were in grade school, I'm sure they said, why don't you give yourself a grade on this test? That happened to all of us at some point, right? A teacher said that. And Matt, you probably gave yourself a C, and I gave myself an A and thought, you're dumb, you deserve that C. Why'd you had a C, right? Like that was poor self-assessment. But in an unstructured learning environment, the external measures are gone, and it all has to be internally driven. And we have to teach people how to transition. The transition from structured to unstructured is incredibly complicated. Most of the good medical education research being done right now is done on transition times because people just simply can't navigate it on their own. So that's the coaching. That's the part of CBME that's really important, is to kind of coach them up to a skill set that perhaps they just have never been exposed to in the past, because structurally college is just not ready for that.
But that assumes that structured learning is the appropriate way for everyone to learn from the get-go. It's the way the education system is set up in the U.S. now, but it doesn't have to be. Like, what if we take a more Montessori approach where these kids are experiential and they're learning from each other, and there are just different methods of assessment than getting the A, B, or C on the test? Obviously, this is a huge disruption of what education would look like in the U.S., but would that actually prepare people not just for professional school, but for life, to be able to self-assess in their own jobs? Would that lead to less burnout amongst the entire populace, because people are able to look at what they're accomplishing in their lives and say, this is great, I'm doing well at this, here's something I can work on. I get what you're saying, that you can make the transition if we say structured is good, but I don't know that I agree that structured is good.
But that's not the question, right? So we do live in a system with structured learning, and if this entire session is about the implementation of CBME, then you're telling me that the implementation of CBME, with Matt's question, has to deconstruct all of the previous modes of it. That's just an impossibility. Like, we have to live in reality, and in reality, there's going to be grades. At some point, those grades stop, And I think that's very important, that we have to recognize that when those grades stop, it challenges the trainee in fundamental ways. But we're not going to change college today in this 1 hour talk.
We've already taken away grades for the STEP. Why can't we take away grades in college? Why can't we take away AP scores? Why can't we?
They just did during the pandemic. There were no SAT scores.
There you go. But they're back. All right, last vote. Those in favor of Auber's position, raise your hand. Auber's position, the reigning champ. Dr. Gisandi.
Ooh, it's
I hope you were
close.
counting.
I was not. Can we revote? Can you share the
Not
hat?
with this group. I do want to say one point on that, though. I wonder if part of this is a language issue, because in school, when you're in the education system, we don't call it self-assessment. We call it assessment as learning, right? And then we move on, and people go into other systems, and then we call it self-assessment, and they go, what are you self-assessing? But meanwhile, we've spent many years teaching them how to do this other thing, which is actually the same thing, but just calling it something different. We need a revote. I need commitment. I need dedication, otherwise we can't leave this room, and we have to be out by 4:50. Yes, everybody has to vote, us too. Okay, reigning champ, Dr. Font position, raise your hand. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Dr. Gisandi position.
Score was 12-13 to Dr. Gisandi.
Thank you all for coming and engaging with us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the conference.